Thank you, Sue. As Sue said, we're Tim and Deb Smith. Can you hear us okay, or would it be better if I held it? Okay. We're here to speak tonight about our 7th book, the recently published Royally Regaling Greater Rochester-Taking Stock of the Rock. We've done dozens of presentations all around the Greater Rochester area, but this is the first time we've ever played Gates, so we're excited to be here. In our most recent book, we have collected stories and histories from the Greater Rochester area, guided by our goal to always be on the lookout for the humor and the intrigue that is embedded within the tales we have to tell.
We have a rather unique backstory that we thought we'd share with you before talking about our latest project. When we were in 8th grade, Deb was a Lima Indian, I was a Honeoye Falls Hornet. The merger between those two school districts took place in between 8th and 9th grade for us. So we were the first class to spend all 4 years as Honeoye Falls-Lima Cougars. We met on the first day of high school, dated for all 4 years, then went to different colleges and ended up not seeing each other again for literally 40 years until my mom passed away.
And I heard about it through the grapevine in Virginia Beach where I was teaching. I sent Tim a sympathy card. He wrote back. One thing led to another, and after I retired from teaching that year, he came down, picked me up, brought me home, and now we're happily married and living in beautiful downtown Mendon. But one unique aspect to our courtship was that every day when I would go to the faculty mailroom, there would be an envelope from Tim waiting for me. The contents would be a letter that I had written to him 40 years ago. He saved them all.
Took me a long time to play those cards. So why don't we get the show started with the man who was actually the very first white settler in what would become modern day Rochester. Now you might be thinking, what are the odds that the very first desperado to pitch a tent on the banks of the Genesee is going to have a salacious and scintillating story to tell? Well, if you're thinking that, don't be so negative. Turns out our first settler had a fascinating story to tell.
His name was Indian Allen, and the Indian was the nickname. He was actually a white guy who was also the first settler of Scottsville before heading into Rochester. In addition to his first settler hobby, he was a practicing polygamist, and he practiced hard. Here is his marital numerology. Upon reaching manhood, the number of wives he had in his stable could be charted as 0, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2.
And that numerology encompasses the comings and goings of 5 different wives altogether. Furthermore, believe it or not, his 5 wives included representation from 3 different races. Of Indian Allen's wives, 3 were white, 1 was black, and 1 was Native American Indian. And if it weren't for the fact that the dating pool of Asian women in Scottsville in 1800 was pretty shallow, we're thinking he probably would have checked that box too.
And just when you think you can't raise the bar of bizarre any higher, Allen is 58 years old when he marries his 5th wife. And if you're wondering how much gas this old geezer could have left in the tank at that point, they go on to have 5 kids.
If you're wondering what else they did for entertainment in the early 1800s, turns out there were indeed some options. In 1828, when Rochester boasted a total population of 10,000, 6,000 people came out to High Falls to see the very first American daredevil to achieve fame on a national level. That daredevil would be Sam Patch, who had achieved national fame by jumping into bodies of water from ever-increasing heights. Nicknamed the Jersey Jumper, Patch was on his way home from performances at Niagara Falls when he decided to swing through Rochester to tackle the High Falls.
On November 6, 1828, Sam Patch jumped 100 feet from a platform at the top of High Falls into the Genesee River. But the opening act for that jump was that he threw his bear cub off of the same platform before him. The Rochester branch of PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, was clearly not yet on the job. When the hat was passed, he raised so much money that he decided to stay in Rochester for an additional week and schedule an encore performance which would take place on Friday, November 13, 1828.
So think of that date. What could possibly go wrong? Come on, Friday the 13th? Really, Rochester? Couldn't somebody have handed this dude a calendar? So for his follow-up act, Sam Patch built a 25-foot high platform, increasing the height of the jump to 125 feet, and published advertisements scheduling his jump at 2 p.m., and the bear was going to jump at 3. As he left the platform, onlookers could immediately tell that something had gone wrong, because Sam's technique was to keep his body totally rigid and enter the water feet first like a torpedo.
This time his body flailed awkwardly. He crashed in the water, and his body did not resurface and was not found until the following spring. There were multiple theories floated as to what might have gone wrong. Personally, based upon the published schedule of Sam jumping at 2 and the bear at 3, we think the bear might have pushed him.
When Midtown Plaza was torn down in 2010, it was a not so exultant ending to what had begun as a national storyline, when in 1962, Midtown had opened amongst fanfare that had branded it as the first indoor urban shopping mall in the United States. That actually made for an interesting historical segue from something that had happened in Rochester over 100 years before.
In 1829, the Reynolds Arcade was built, and with multiple additions by the mid-1800s, we ended up with a 56-foot-long, glass-covered skylight atrium that literally bisected an entire city block, with one entrance on Main Street and one on Exchange. Check out this picture. And you really get a feel of how ahead of its time this arcade was. As you can see, it was 3 stories high with a balcony that wrapped around the second floor, overlooking the ground. It was a lavish complex of offices, shops, services, and restaurants.
Check out how cool this place was. It gives you pause to think, there's your first indoor urban shopping mall. George Eastman got his first job here. Bausch and Lomb started their first optical store here. Samuel Morse and Hiram Sibley founded the Western Union Telegraph Company here.
And as you can see, the Western Union sign in the picture, it's right up there on the left. Also, Thomas Edison, Daniel Webster delivered second-floor balcony speeches here. For over a century, it was Rochester's center of commerce, some calling it a city within a city. In 1933, it was replaced with a larger 11-story office building which bears the same name.
Here's a foxy scam story for you. Beginning in 1849, a trio of sisters, Leah, Kate, and Maggie Fox, initiate the most famous and long-lasting scam in Rochester history. For decades, they succeed in convincing many locals that they are mediums, able to provide the opportunity to communicate with the dead through a series of rapping or knocking noises, which answer their questions on a once for yes, twice for no basis. Skeptics are challenged to visit one of their sessions and detect any fraud, but no one is ever able to reveal how they're doing it.
So how they actually pull it off might have been a secret best taken to the grave, but whatever reason, they do admit in 1888 that the noises they are able to generate in otherwise stone-silent rooms come from an ability they have mastered to simultaneously crack their toe knuckles on that once for yes, twice for no basis.
While the Fox sisters are not buried at Mount Hope Cemetery, they probably should have been. And while we're on the subject, here's our weird way to look at it. Fun fact regarding Mount Hope, there are almost 150,000 more people dead and buried in that cemetery than there are alive and living in the city of Rochester. Keep hoping that that zombie resurrection doesn't come to fruition, because we're going to be seriously outnumbered.
As the 20th century kicked off, there was an array of characters prowling the streets of Rochester, and we're excited to share with you a pair with parallel monikers. Here's the tales of peddler Frog Leg George and tavern owner / museum curator Rattlesnake Pete. This popular, peculiar pair certainly do manage to fulfill the flair of their flashy nicknames.
The two of them lived during about the same time period, with Frog-Leg George hopping around from 1860 to 1936, and Rattlesnake Pete slithering around from 1858 to 1932. So what did these two dudes do to earn their animalistic nicknames? Well, Frog-Leg George scoured the swamps of rural Monroe County, capturing frogs and turtles, which he sold to restaurants that served frog legs and turtle soup, both of which were considered to be delicacies during that era. Who knew?
In a reversal of the concept where Frog Leg George brought his critters to the customers, it was the customers who came to visit Rattlesnake Pete. He ran a combination of tavern and museum on Mill Street in the city. While enjoying their food and beverage, Pete's clientele was also treated to live viewing experiences of animals and memorabilia.
As his nickname implied, Pete was a master of reptiles, and he had terrariums of poisonous snakes, copperheads and rattlesnakes, which people could see, and Pete would often take them out of their cages and handle them to ooh and ah his customers. So that was legit, as were some animal aberrations he had, such as his stuffed two-headed calf, a freak of nature, but it happens, and that was real.
But upon closer examination, the authenticity of some of Pete's memorabilia became a little more suspect. He claimed to have a pipe that was smoked by Abraham Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, the battle flag from Custer's last stand, and the weight used for Rochester's last hanging. Documentation of the chain of ownership of those latter items is sketchy at best.
If you ask people that came in contact with him how they would assess his character, you'd receive a pretty wide variety of responses. To some, he came off as a charming eccentric, while others viewed him as just a sophisticated con artist.
How many of you ever heard references to Driving Park Avenue come up on the TV or radio? How many of you know how it got its name?
Anybody know?
Well, it was a horse racing track that operated in the Driving Park neighborhood from 1874 to 1902. It also hosted other events such as the circus and Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, as well as the first automobile race in Rochester, which took place in 1900.
It started out as a successful and popular venue, but when sports betting became taboo in the 1890s, things went downhill. During its last summer of existence in 1902, it was actually taken over by thousands of gypsies, which, as you might suspect, did not make for a comfortable marital mesh with the city. It all ended ugly, just like in Cher's song, Gypsies, Tramps, and Thieves. And if you're wondering what happened to them, the best thing about gypsies is that, well, they're gypsies. They don't stay in one place very long. And by the end of the year, they were all gone.
Here's a story that combines a very personal touch with a huge piece of Rochester history. When I reunited with Tim and came back home in 2013, he shared with me his collection of memorabilia on the Rochester Royals, the NBA basketball team that played here from 1945 through 1957 and actually won the NBA championship in 1951. They played at the old Edgerton Park Sports Arena, which was torn down in 1957. And Tim made a casual comment that sometime he would like to go into the city and just stand at the spot where history was made all those years ago.
You know, so that was really just a throwaway comment I made at the time. Truly never thought about it for the next year. But the following summer, we get in the car one day and Deb tells me we're going on a surprise field trip and she's going to drive me to a place I've never been before to meet some people I've never met before. I literally have no idea what she's up to until she turns into a parking area where I see a sign that reads Edgerton Community Center.
Through a long series of phone calls and conversations, I had been able to connect with two gentlemen from the Edgerton Community Center who were going to meet us at the park and make Tim's dream come true. They themselves didn't know for sure where exactly the arena had been, but they knew nothing had gone up since that building came down. And they had a folder full of notes and maps. For the record, Edgerton Park is spread over 42 acres, and it's not like the location would be blatantly obvious.
All right, so armed with our notes and maps we took to the fields, we knew that there was and still is only one remaining vestige from the Edgerton Park Sports Arena, and it's a 3-foot wide, 8-foot high concrete column that stood sentinel guarding one side of the entrance to the old parking lot. Once we located that, everything else gradually fell into place and we were able to walk it off, and then, at least in our minds, we rebuild the old arena, center the court within the overall rectangle, walk to the spot where the winning shot was taken in 1951, and know that we are within a few feet, give or take, of the spot where decades ago NBA history was recorded right here in our hometown.
The expanded timeline of Edgerton Park takes on an even greater historical significance. It was in 1849 that the Western House of Refuge would open there and gradually grow to become the largest reform school in the state and one of the largest in the country. In 1902, the city purchased 1,500 acres in rural Rush and moved the reform school to the hamlet of Industry, where it still operates today. That left the city with a huge 42-acre multi-building complex, which was gradually transformed into Edgerton Park.
For decades during the first half of the 1900s, Edgerton Park became the social and cultural hub of the city. In addition to the sports arena, which hosted all the city's major indoor events, Edgerton was also home to, get this list, the Rochester Library, the Rochester Museum and Science Center, an indoor zoo, an NFL football team, the annual 4th of July celebration, and the Monroe County Fair. 400,000 people flooded the park for Rochester's centennial celebration in 1934.
It was a glamorous era, during which if something important and or exciting were happening in Rochester, it was probably happening at Edgerton Park. But along with the good, inevitably came the bad. The timing basically coincides with World War II, but in reality, the demise of Edgerton Park was a result of a combination of many factors. In 1941, the city pulled out the tracks and the streetcars, and the automobile took over those streets.
In 1947, the county fair moved to Henrietta. In 1956, the War Memorial went up, replacing the Edgerton Park Sports Arena as the city's state-of-the-art sports venue. In 1956, the subway also closed, and in 1957, the Royals left. Edgerton Park had a glorious run while it lasted, but it ended with a whimper rather than a bang. In a span of only about 15 years, the park had gone from being the centerpiece of life in the city to being peripheral at best. It was a swift fall from grace, leaving the Edgerton era as a gilded memory.
We're going to track this thread through the county's fair move to Henrietta in 1947, where we will bring in a brush with the bizarre. While the fair thrived for decades, the societal changes of the late 60s and early 70s began to bring tensions between the town of Henrietta and the fair. As some of the classically rural county fair events, such as rodeos and animal exhibits, began to give way to more sensational attractions such as the Ape Girl, the Lobster Man, and the Snake Woman.
In letters to the editor, Henrietta residents began to use the word tawdry to describe their dissatisfaction with some fair attractions, and it all came to a head in, of all places, at the Tahiti Burlesque tent. What could go wrong in that tent, right? Well, how do we word this for a family audience? I guess we'll just say that in a playful burst of exuberance, one of the girls exposed a Tahitian treat that crossed a town line. The cops were brought in, arrests were made, and Henrietta and the county fair would never be the same again.
If you're a Rochesterian looking to have a great sports trivia question tucked away in your back pocket, tell everyone else to look away right now and we'll hand you one under the table. Timing is important here because you do not want Rochester to be the topic of the conversation. At the time when you pose this question, you want the topic totally elsewhere. Then you throw out this trivia question. What are the only two cities to have teams that were charter members in the original NFL and NBA? One is Chicago. Who do you think the other one is?
So then you got to allow for a pause to run through the most obvious possibilities, such as, would it be New York, Philly, Boston? Pick your point and chime in with the actual answer, which would be Rochester. The Rochester Jeffersons were charter members of the NFL in 1921, and the Rochester Royals were charter members of the NBA in 1949.
Let me use that sports story to segue into some significant African-American achievements that actually took place in Rochester. Many recognize the milestone year of 1947 when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier, becoming Major League Baseball's first black player. An historical injustice we'd like to rectify is that far too little attention is paid to the fact that the Rochester Royals, the NBA franchise alluded to earlier, had a black player, William Dolly King, 1 year earlier in 1946, but you never really hear about that.
Then Black's Facts number 2, when the NBA officially formed in 1949, the first occasion of an African-American stepping on the court in an NBA game also occurred in Rochester. Now at this point, let's transition our sports theme onto the game of golf. Rochester's always been a big golf town, and when our research drove us down that fairway, here's the quirkiest story that sprung up.
Well, the first Rochester area golfer to achieve lifetime membership status on the PGA Tour was Terry Deal. When we sent him our working draft of our book, at one point he got so into it that he expanded his interest in the sports component and he delved into other chapters of the book. In addition to responding to our golf component, we received further feedback from Terry, confirming the fact that he had read the crime chapter.
And so we get an email from Terry Deal. He's clearly left his golf bag in the clubhouse at this point. The email reads, Tim and Deb, in reading the crime component, don't you think it would be appropriate to include serial killer Ken Bianchi, the Hillside Strangler? He was in my sophomore homeroom at Aquinas, and our mothers were on the same bowling team.
How was that for some insider info?
Yeah, you just can't stop but think about how much we would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in the Brighton Bowl when Mrs. Deal and Mrs. Bianchi had that conversation about, so what do you think your boy will do when he grows up? I taught high school English at Victor for 33 years altogether, and here's one of my funnier stories from that stint. One piece of literature that I taught to all 5 of my classes for all 33 of those years was Shakespeare's play, Romeo and Juliet. So totaling up those 5 times a year readings, I can confirm exactly 165 encounters with that play. And the go-to high school movie version of Romeo and Juliet had traditionally been Franco Zeffirelli's classic 1968 film, which starred Leonard Whiting and Olivia Hussey as the star-crossed 14-year-old lovers.
Zeffirelli was noted for pushing the envelope of the sexual revolution. In this film, he wanted to see how much he could reveal and still maintain that PG rating, which would eventually enable his film to be shown in most high schools. The key point of the story occurs when Romeo and Juliet woke up after spending their wedding night together.
So in pushing that sexual envelope, Zeffirelli threw out a caveat for each gender. When Romeo gets up that morning, he walks away from the bed to the window, and you've heard the term full frontal nudity. Well, what you see on the screen in this case would be the exact opposite of that. It's a Romeo's bare butt bonanza.
Well, Juliet was played by the amply endowed Olivia Hussey, and for a split second when she gets up to say goodbye, her bountiful breasts slip out of her robe, and let me put it this way. If the movie had been in 3D, some people in the front row would have been seriously injured. While the view lasts only a split second, for the 14-year-old boys in that classroom, it was like a second that may have lived on for hours, days, or even weeks.
When I was wrapping up class, I'd usually close by asking if anybody had any questions. And the end of class on that particular day was always a little different, with the kids kind of awkwardly looking around, waiting and wondering if anybody was going to say something about the risque shot, but no one seemed to know how to do it without coming off in a negative light. So usually nothing was said, the bell rang, and the kids went on their way. But not on the day of this story. That crafty class clown, Sean Wright, finally came up with the perfect way to thread the needle, to refocus attention on the scene in question, and do it in a fashion that came off as clever rather than crude. Sean raised his hand and with perfect timing and delivery said, Mr. Smith, was Juliet really just 14 years old?
Here's a story that we share. I advanced too quickly. Here's a story we share in a book that took us totally by surprise when we started our research. Did you know that there's a pretty good chance that Jack the Ripper is buried in Rochester? The dude's name is Francis Tumblety. He was born and bred here. He's buried at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. He was in London for all of the murders, but the head of the British investigative team went to his grave saying that he thought Tumblety was the most likely suspect.
In terms of crime, Rochester certainly has some tales to tell. Of course, there are the still unsolved alphabet or double initial murders that took place in the early 70s. That was when 3 young girls were killed within a 2-year period. Each girl had double initials and was found in a town which started with the same letter of the girl's initials. That clarify any confusion of what we mean by that. Michelle Mayenza was found in Macedon, Carmen Colon was found in Churchville, and Wanda Walkowitz was found in Webster. Got some theories about this that we share in the book.
Here's another murder dilemma for you. Put yourself in the position of this guy. You're on trial for a murder that happened in South Lima, which you did not commit. In a quirky series of events, circumstantial evidence is lining up, which seems to suggest your guilt. You actually do have the ability to prove your innocence, but find yourself reluctant to play that card. Why would that be? Because your alibi is that you can prove that you were robbing the train depot in Honeoye Falls at the time the murder was committed. It makes for the best out of the frying pan and into the fire story ever.
Continuing on our criminal trail, Rochester was also home to two of the largest armored car heists in history, both in the 1990s. We lead into this as if we were starting a joke. Stop us if you've heard this one. A cop, a terrorist, and a priest walk into a bar and I'm taking it from there. Those are actually the three main players in the story, which certainly makes for a good one.
We did a review of amusement parks in the greater Rochester area, covering 10 of them. Obviously, there's not nearly that many now, so this component is dotted with rise and fall stories. The most glorious tale told here is that of Ontario Beach Park, which operated from 1884 through 1919. During its height, it became known as the Coney Island of the West, with a record crowd of 42,000 attending on opening day in 1907. The only remaining vestige of the park is a carousel, which is still operated today more than 100 years after the park closed.
We loved working with the team at Seabreeze to document their story. And probably the most tantalizing tale here would have to be the concept of how a 17-room house was built into and below the structure of the Jackrabbit roller coaster. The family who operated the ride actually resided in that house from 1923 to 1972. And the house remained intact but unoccupied for another decade before it was finally torn down during the winter of 1982-83.
Another local project that had us roaring with our collaboration was with the Seneca Park Zoo. We got to spend the day with their most experienced docent, Maureen Wheatland. And while we share the full details in our book, we thought we'd share with you our favorite of her escaped animal stories. On one occasion, when a Girl Scout troop was enjoying a sleepover in the Discovery Center, the zoo's 16-foot-long Burmese python escaped and curled up on the floor right beside the sleeping girls.
No,
Our humorous take on that was to say that whatever merit badge was received by the girl who woke up to deal with a 16-foot snake in her bed, it just wasn't good enough.
In working on this project on and off for the past several years, actually, it's impossible to keep track of all the local people we've spoken with at one time or another. So if the person who turned us on to this Gates story is sitting in the room right now, and he or she could be, and going uncredited, please accept our apologies, but here's the story. At one time we spoke with someone involved with the Gates Historical Society and asked the question, what's the funniest or most bizarre story ever associated with Gates? And it's one that shows the Gates Police Department on task and doing a great job.
Our contributor queued us this one up by saying, "You said you wanted something funny or bizarre? Well, I'm going to give you a check on the bizarre box on this one. Here's a story of the last time Gates made the national news with CBS covering the events of October 29, 2014. After being provided with the lead, we did some research and turned it into a story in the book, which we titled, Zombie Once, Shame on You, Zombie Twice, Shame on Me. We're sure some of you remember this.
A girl that we will identify only as Catherine began the evening with an outing to her favorite Gates watering hole, which happened to be hosting its Halloween zombie prom party. Nothing like throwing back a few brews with the undead, but of course one must always be wary of throwing back too many.
Well, after spotting a vehicle driving on Buffalo Road with no headlights on at 2 o'clock in the morning, Gates Police Lieutenant John Ballard pulled the car over and was surprised to see that it was being driven by a woman in a zombie costume, complemented by a full makeup job featuring fake blood and cuts on her face and real alcohol on her breath. Happy Halloween.
She was taken to the station, booked for drunk driving, and released to a friend that picked her up. Somehow, she ended up back in her car, Ballard said, and in what was certainly Catherine's Halloween from hell, another officer spotted her swerving in traffic shortly before 5 a.m. She was arrested again and booked with a second DWI.
It made for a hell of a combination. What with the zombie prom, the bodacious zombie getup, and the 2 DWI arrests in less than 3 hours on the same road in the same town, it made for a Halloween story the media thought was to die for. So this morning, let me just tell you what happened. We called the Gates Town Hall.
Police Department.
And asked if Mr. Ballard was still there, and she said no, he had retired. And we told her why, and she goes, oh my gosh, I remember that story. It's just kind of cute.
Now, at first she was kind of like hesitant, like thinking he was in trouble or something like that. So then we had to kind of get ourselves out of that and explain to her, no, we wrote this book, had this story from Gates. If he was still around, we wanted to talk to him and get his insight on what it went down, but John's retired. The city of Rochester has some pretty impressive inventions on its resume, including some everybody knows about, like the camera, Kodak, copier, Xerox. There's also some you probably don't know about, like the voting machine and the eyelash curler, which fall into the fairly benign category, but counter that with the realization that Western New York was also home to the invention of the electric chair and the machine gun. We figured out how to kill both one person and a whole lot of people in the shortest time possible. Kind of ironically, the inventors of both of those devices were dentists.
And we just didn't invent things, we also created some fine food and drink. There's Weigel's, White Hots topped with French's yellow mustard. From the outlying regions, there's Jell-O from Leroy, topped with Cool Whip from Avon. In terms of beverages, nobody pushed the envelope harder than Jolt Cola, who created the first energy drink here in 1985, leading with an advertising pitch, boasting the fact that it had all the sugar and twice the caffeine.
So while that was a jolting groundbreaker, pun intended, some of the following pitches were even edgier and more entertaining. Jolt enticed energy enthusiasts and music lovers alike with the claim that it had so much caffeine you can actually see sounds.
And for those soda drinkers who might have been intimidated by their parents, there was also this advertising slogan that admonished, you say your mom wouldn't like it? Well, your mom's not here.
We covered Rochester sports to a never-before-achieved level, and to skim off just a few highlights, our city is certainly the king of contest longevity, games that lasted the longest. Next are some stories where the Rochester players, they could have used some of that Jolt Cola probably. Rochester teams played in the longest Major League NBA basketball game ever, the Royals, the longest professional minor league basketball game ever, the Zeniths, the longest Major League Soccer game ever, the Lancers, and the longest professional baseball game ever, the Red Wings. I'm almost out of breath just talking about it.
And even if you're not a huge sports fan, many of the stories will still resonate. Rochesterian Ken Kaiser umpired in Major League Baseball for 23 years and was known for his irreverent sense of humor, which he showcases in his autobiography, Planet of the Umps. Here's our favorite story from that book. Kaiser wrote, one game I was at third base at Yankee Stadium and I heard an unusual thumping sound behind me. I turned around and saw a knife sticking in the ground. Well, under the circumstances, I did the only thing possible. When I pulled it out of the ground, I showed it to Yankees third baseman Greg Nettles and said, hey, Greg, look what somebody threw at you.
Okay, here's another audience participation option for you. In terms of audience capacity, it was Rochester's largest venue ever. 20,000 plus for sports, 30,000 plus for concerts. It was named after the city's greatest war hero, and most people in Rochester don't even know his name anymore. Let's begin to rectify that local injustice tonight. If you know the name, repeat with us, Rochester's greatest war hero ever was, and you got this one?
Somebody said it. Go ahead.
Somebody
Hollander?
said, yeah, Don Hollander. And go ahead.
Here's the long story short on Don Hollander. He graduated from Aquinas in 1952 and the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1956. He made the cover of Sports Illustrated as an Army football player, and then after being drafted by the New York Giants, chose a career in the Army over a career in the NFL.
In 1967, he volunteered for active duty in the Vietnam War. At the Battle of Ong Thon, he was flying a helicopter when he noticed U.S. troops in danger on the ground. Rather than fly back to base as he had been directed, he chose to land his chopper and lead a rescue mission, and he lost his life in the effort that saved several others.
That local largest stadium ever was the old Aquinas Stadium, which was built on Mount Read Boulevard in 1949. As we stated previously, it could seat over 20,000 for sporting events and 30,000 for concerts when people could fill the field space. Some glorious moments occurred at that stadium, which was renamed Hollander Memorial Stadium after his death. But unfortunately, after the stadium came down in 1985, a lot of local people seemed to forget.
All right, so as we work our way through this presentation tonight, we hope we'll be leaving you with some humor and some history, but here's one thing we want you to absolutely leave with tonight. Know Don Hollander. Remember Don Hollander, and when the opportunity affords itself, please share his name with others.
We shared at the opening of this presentation that the merger between the Lima and Honeoye Falls School District occurred in between 8th and 9th grade for us. The vote didn't occur until June 12th, so with the beginning of school just a couple months away, there was a lot to do and not much time to do it.
One thing on the to-do list was that we needed to get a new nickname and new team colors.
At Lima, our colors were purple and gold, and we were the Indians.
And in Honeoye Falls, we wore orange and black, and we were the Hornets.
So during the first week of school, flyers were passed out in homeroom one morning, and we were informed that we would soon be voting for new school colors and mascots.
We were given two choices. To assure that there was no sense of favoritism, the four colors of the old schools were realigned in new combinations.
Our two choices were that we could be the black and gold Cougars or the purple and orange Sunrisers.
Which of course begged the question, what the hell is a sunriser?
But the joke that ran through the student body at the time was the notion that if they were going to force us to combine the old colors, they should also figure out a way to combine the old nicknames.
And with Lima being the Indians and Honeoye Falls being the Hornets, the consensus student choice was that we should have become the HFL Horny Indians. Wouldn't have scored high on the scale of political correctness, but think of the merchandise we could have sold.
So that wraps up our presentation on our most recent book, Royally Regaling Greater Rochester. And we also have signed copies with us that are available. They're also available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all fine bookstores. But we did bring everyone with us, and I'll show you them all. And if you want to know anything about them, the first one, the Beatles, the Bible, and Manson, we write for the paper. We just bless our community. It's probably like 8,000 people, over 8,000 that receive it. And we have people constantly tell us that they have seen every documentary on Manson, but they cannot believe what the things that we had listed in this book. We had...
Well, I'm going to tack on one thing
All right,
to
go
that
ahead.
book. Well, just in looking at that first one that we wrote, when we started writing for the paper, which was in 2016, the owner, publisher, Chris Carosa, started coming to us and say, you guys should write a book. People love your stuff, you're so good. And, it was an enticing opportunity, but to write a book, we had to write at least 50,000 words on the same topic. And our weekly articles are about 1,500 words. So it was nothing popped right away, and we just kind of said to ourselves, when the time is right, God will give us a topic and we'll go with it. So in the beginning of 2019, we're reading this newspaper article, and it says, pointed out that coming up that summer, within a 30-day period, this is really kind of crazy when you think about it, within a 30-day period that summer, it was going to be the 50th anniversaries of First Man on the Moon, the Woodstock Festival, Chappaquiddick, the Manson murders, and then it also happened to be the month that we met. So it was like, there's our sign, we gotta pick one of those. And of those different topics, the Manson one, obviously like a terrible topic and tragic story, but just with all the craziness that surrounded them, it was interesting.
So in our gallery where we write, we had my mom's King James Bible, because he quoted Revelations 9 throughout the whole thing to his cult. We had the White Album from the Beatles, and we had court documents of
the whole transcript.
The whole transcript. So we were able to pull from that to write this book, so it's really cool. Tit for Tat is our best of our best from our different stories that we write for the paper. What's in a Name are the quirkiest places around the world, and how they got it and why in English it's not appropriate, but they keep it because in their language it's okay. And there's one that's in Austria, it's not a good name, but they voted 3 times to get rid of it, and they won't because of the tourist attractions. It draws a lot of people to get their picture on by the sign. Black Specs, we've been on TV, Channel 13, Spectrum,
8.
and 8. It's all about blacks, historical and hysterical. It's really good. Walking in Women's Wonderland, it's dedicated to both our moms, and this is the one we just got an order for 10 of them. A woman ordered them, I was telling Jackie about it just a bit ago, to give out as Christmas gifts. It's all about, same thread as Black Specs, taking the historical and hysterical and doing it in one book. Our one before, that we published before this last one, Royally Regaling, this was supposed to be 2 authors, Crown of the Animal Kingdom. We ended up putting the word out. We received one zoo from each of the 50 states, contributed some writing to it, and 107 countries contributed to it, even Ukraine. And he was saying, as bombs are going off right now, you can read it right in the book, I'm still breeding animals. I mean, it's amazing, the people, the zoos, the animal advocacy groups that contributed to this. And then we have Worldly Regaling. So just wanted to share a little bit synopsis about each one of those books.
Anybody have any questions about anything that we brought up?
Yes.
Do you still write for
The paper?
a paper?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's the Mendon-Honeoye Falls-Lima Sentinel is the title, but as other smaller town newspapers have shut down, we're now the official paper, in addition to Mendon-Honeoye Falls and Lima, for Rush, Henrietta, Pittsfield, Scottsville, Wheatland, Avon, and West Bloomfield.
In fact, the business card I gave you, it says it all on there, okay? The name of the name of the newspaper and everything.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming out on a cold night, you guys.